everyone, my name is Lindsay. Thank you so much for joining me here today. For those of you who are here returning, thank you so much for coming back. You guys are the best. And for those of you who are here for the first time, I really hope that you enjoy this content, that you find it helpful and inspiring for your walk with Jesus. And if you do, I really hope that you choose to like, subscribe, share with friends, comment, click the notification bell, all of those things, because if you do, it's good for you, and if you do, it's also good for me because it helps the YouTube algorithm know that you guys all like this kind of stuff and that maybe other people might like it too, and then it spits it out in front of other people so they can watch it and be blessed as well. So with that out of the way, let's dive straight into the story for today. Today we are looking at Joseph once again. This is like the fifth time that we're talking about Joseph, and today we're going to be looking especially in Genesis chapter 44. But before we do, I'll just give you a little bit of backstory of what's going on here. So Joseph has been in Egypt now for about 22 years. He was sold as a slave and he was working in Potiphar's house, and then he was in the prison, and now he's been working as Pharaoh's right-hand man, as the Prime Minister of Egypt for like the last 7 years now. Actually, no, for the last 9 years, actually. This is now the second year of the famine. So there was 7 years of really plentiful harvest, and now it's 2 years into the famine. And at this point, everyone in the whole wide world has come to realize that they're in a famine, and the only place that they can get any grain is in Egypt. And so the people from various different countries around the world are starting to come to Egypt, including Joseph's actual own family from the land of Canaan. And so his older 10 brothers come to Egypt in the previous year to where we're talking about today. And they come and they ask for grain, and Joseph recognizes them. He meets all the people who come in to buy grain, and he realizes that, hey, these are my brothers who sold me into slavery. And he kind of gets a bit triggered, and he throws them in prison for 3 days, and he gets angry at them, and he tells them that they're spies because he can't think of anything better to say, or any other excuse to throw them into prison and treat them the way he's feeling, because, you know, he's got some emotions to deal with all of a sudden. So they're there, and then he takes them out. He decides to keep one of his brothers, Simeon, as a slave, and that the other 9 can go back to the land of Canaan. They mention that they still have a father alive, and they also mention that they have another brother that's still alive, which would be Benjamin, his little baby brother from his both parents. And so he decides to keep one of them, the rest can go home, and he tells them, hey, if you want to come back and get more grain in the future, if you want to prove to me that you're not spies, then you're going to have to bring that other brother of yours that you just mentioned. And they are like, all right, let's head back, I guess. They get back to talk to their father Jacob. Jacob's like, yo, where is Simeon? And they're like, he's a slave. We got accused of being spies, and we're not allowed to go back there and show our faces ever again unless Benjamin comes with us, because otherwise, yeah, it'll basically prove that we're spies if we can't, you know, follow through on what we said. And so Jacob, who, you know, his favorite wife was Rachel, and then Rachel had Joseph and Benjamin for him, and then Joseph, as his favorite wife's first child, became Jacob's favorite, and then that didn't end up going down too well because all of his other brothers knew that he was the favorite, and they thought he was a spoilt brat, and they decided they wanted to kill him or sell him or something, get rid of him, whatever. And so that favoritism really didn't work out too well for the whole family, and especially for Joseph in that instance. And now Jacob has lost his wife Rachel, and he's lost his first favorite child, and now he's left with just one more child of Rachel's, and that's Benjamin. And so all his favoritism that went towards Rachel and that had gone towards Joseph is now being poured out on Benjamin. He doesn't really care about the other sons as much because they were the children of the servants and of this other wife that he didn't even want in the first place. Like, he doesn't care about them, and that's just kind of the way it was. Wasn't necessarily a good thing by any stretch of the imagination, but that's just how it was. And so his wife has died, his first favorite son has died, and he's got one favorite son left, and he cannot imagine being separated from Benjamin because he's his only favorite one left. And when they say, hey, we need to take Benjamin back with us the next time, otherwise we're not going to get grain, and we're certainly never going to see Simeon again, we're all going to starve to death, Jacob's like, nah, you're going to have to figure this out some other way. I cannot afford to lose Benjamin. Benjamin, if he dies, if he goes missing, if anything happens to Benjamin, I'm just going to die when I find out. Like, that's it. I'm just going to die. Like, there's no other way for me to live without Benjamin. He's my last lifeline, really. And so the rest of the brothers are like, oh, well, that's not going to work. And so a year goes past, and they're getting into a pretty dire situation. There's no grain left. They need grain to eat and to try and grow some more crops next year, or, you know, feed the cattle. And they go to their father Jacob and say, hey, we have to go, and we need to get more grain, and we have to take Benjamin with us. And after a lot of cajoling, a lot of convincing, Jacob finally relents and says, sure, take him, but hey, if something happens, I'm gonna die. And they're like, okay. And Judah, who's Jacob's fourth son, he's not the first, he's not the last, he's certainly not a favorite, but Judah has leadership capability. His older and younger brothers kind of looked to him when 20 years before he suggested, hey, let's not kill Joseph, let's just sell him as a slave. They were like, that's a good idea, let's do that. And so he's already taken on a leadership position in that time, and as we see it play out, he ends up having the birthright. He ends up having the promise and the blessing that is given to the nation of Israel. He is the one who that will come through. So he has effectively taken Joseph's place as the leader, as the one who will lead the family and have the birthright. He has taken that position. And so in this time, he once again, in his leadership capabilities, steps up and says to Jacob, hey, look, if anything happens to Benjamin, it'll be on my head. You can blame me. I will put my life as surety, as guarantee for Benjamin's life. If anything is going to touch him, it's going to have to touch me first. And so with that guarantee in place, Jacob relents and says, okay, you guys can go, but I'll probably end up dying, so whatever, like, this is probably futile. And so they all, 10 of them, again, head off to Egypt to go and try and get some grain. They arrive, and Joseph decides, all right, let's give them a party, let's give them a lunch meeting, and I'll feed them and give them all these nice foods and hang out with them. And he meets his favorite baby brother, and everything is just wonderful. Benjamin is alive. His older brothers haven't killed Benjamin too. Like, their jealousy hasn't extended to Benjamin, at least. That's a good win. That's something really great for him to see. And so he feeds Benjamin 5 times as much food as all the rest of them, and he just pours out all of his love and his affection onto Benjamin in a kind of detached kind of way. Like, he's not going out and saying, hey Benjamin, it's your big brother Joseph, like, I haven't seen you in 20 years. He doesn't do that. He just feeds him a whole bunch, and he feeds everyone else, and he, you know, gives them a good time. And then that evening they'll go to bed, and then the next morning we pick it up in chapter 44. Joseph tells his steward of his house to fill up all the men's sacks as much as possible, you know, give them as much grain as they can possibly carry to take back to Canaan, and also put the money back in the top of the sacks. This is something that happened the first time round. They had their money that they had paid for the grain returned, and it looked really suspicious when they got home. And now it's going to look even more suspicious this time. So he tells the steward, fill up their sacks, put all the money back, and also put my cup, this silver fancy cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest and his grain money. So he did according to the word that Joseph had spoken. As soon as the morning dawned, the men were sent away, they and their donkeys. When they had gone out of the city and were not yet far off, Joseph said to his steward, get up, follow the men, and when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is not this the one from which my lord drinks, and with which he indeed practices divination? Like this silver cup, they were saying at least that Joseph can actually see the future with it. You have done evil in so doing. So he overtook them and he spoke to them these same words. And they said to him, why does my lord say these words? Far be it from us that your servants should do such a thing. Look, we brought back to you from the land of Canaan the money which we found in the mouth of our sacks. How then could we steal silver or gold from your lord's house? Like, we found that our money was in our sacks the first time around, and we brought it back this time. You know that. We told you. We admitted it. We didn't know what happened, and we brought it back. Why would you think that we would steal now? That obviously can't be true. And so, with whomever of your servants, whoever of us it is found, this cup, let him die, and we will also be my lord's slaves. And so they're saying, look, we're so confident of the fact that we haven't stolen this cup, that whoever you happen to find this cup with, they'll be put to death and the rest of us will be slaves. Like, we're going to put our money where our mouth is. And so the steward said, now also let it be according to your words. With whom it is found shall be my slave, and you shall be blameless. So he's like, no, I don't need to kill anyone today. I only need one slave. So instead of like killing whoever I find it with and making the rest of you my slaves, I'll just take that person who's at fault as my slave, and the rest of you guys can go free. Does that sound a bit better? I think that sounds a bit better. Okay. Then each man speedily let down his sack to the ground, and each opened his sack. So he searched. He began with the oldest and left off with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and each man loaded his donkey and returned to the city. They were so upset to find out that the cup was in Benjamin's sack. They were like, hold on a second. We were having a good time up until now. Like, we were doing fine. We have Benjamin with us. Everything's okay. We've got our grain. The guy in charge of Egypt doesn't think that we're spies anymore. We're free to go. And they're, trotting on their merry way to head back to Canaan. And then the thing that they have been so concerned about happening this whole time, that something might happen to Benjamin, that greatest fear is what ends up happening. And they're like, what the heck just happened? Like, how can this happen? Obviously, Benjamin wasn't the person who did that. He knew his life was at risk as well. Like, he wasn't going to go out of his way and steal something and make any trouble. He didn't want to, make his father die if he wasn't able to come home. He knew what was going on as well. Like, he was being as careful as he possibly could, and they all knew that. They were like, what is going on? Like, we're all doing our very best to get home in one piece, and something's just happened. So this calamity all of a sudden just broke upon them, and instead of abandoning Benjamin, like they had abandoned Joseph 20 years before, they had completely sold Joseph into slavery and rejected him and abandoned him in that way. And yet, when it looked like Benjamin had done the wrong thing, they were like, nah, we cannot abandon him. We're all going to go back to Egypt. You said that we are all free to go to the steward, but we're not going anywhere. So they tore their clothes, which was a symbol of mourning and like grief. Like, this is a terrible thing that's happened. It's basically like somebody's died. And instead of them going free, they were like, nah, we can't. We have to stick with our brother. And so they all turn around and head back and offer to be Joseph's slaves. So Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, and he was still there, and they fell before him on the ground. And Joseph said to them, what deed is this you have done? Did you not know that such a man as I can certainly practice divination? Then Judah said, what shall we say to my lord? What shall we speak, or how shall we clear ourselves? God has found out the iniquity of your servants. Here we are, my lord's slaves, both we and he also, with whom the cup was found. But he said, far be it from me that I should do so. The man in whose hand the cup was found, he shall be my slave. And as for you, go up in peace to your father. So Joseph is reiterating the fact, like, you guys are free to go. I just want to keep the guy who stole my cup. And they were like, no, we're here. And I find it really interesting that Judah says, God has found out the iniquity of your servants. And if you're not aware, iniquity and transgression, these two words are other words for sin. So sin is the overall term, and then you can kind of split it down the middle and say that there is iniquity type of sin, and then there's transgression type of sin. Transgression is a sin that you do outwardly. It's like hitting your brother over the head with a stick. Whereas iniquity is the inward sin. It's the thought about doing the act. It's the hatred. It's whatever's going on inside your heart that is sinful that leads to transgression. Okay, so Judah is saying that God knows our hearts and he knows that we are sinful. And it's because of that we're all here. Like, him and his brothers recognize the fact that the sin that they'd committed in the past and that they had committed in their hearts was actually being brought to fruition at this point by getting them in trouble with this guy who was in charge of Egypt. And they admitted that, and they were humble. Judah especially was leading in this humility and saying, hey, look, we're sinful people. Obviously our God knows that, and he's allowed us to fall into your hands and get in trouble with you. Like, we're not going to argue. There's no way for us to say that we're any better than we actually are. Like, we're going to humbly submit to what God is doing in our lives in this moment. Then Judah came near to him and said, O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's hearing, and do not let your anger burn against your servant, for you are even like Pharaoh. My Lord asked his servant, saying, have you a father or a brother? And we said to my Lord, we have a father, an old man and a child of his old age, who is young. His brother is dead, and he alone is left of his mother's children, and his father loves him. Then you said to your servants, bring him down to me, that I may set my eyes on him. And we said to my Lord, the lad cannot leave his father, for if he should leave his father would die. But you said to your servants, unless your youngest brother comes down with you, you shall see my face no more. So it was, when we went up to your servant my father, that we told him the words of my Lord. And our father said, go back and buy us a little food. But we said, we cannot go down. If our youngest brother is with us, then we will go down. For we may not see the man's face unless our youngest brother is with us. Then your servant my father said to us, you know that my wife bore me 2 sons. And the one went out from me, and I said, surely he is torn to pieces, and I have not seen him since. But if you take this one also from me, and calamity befalls him, you shall bring down my grey hair with sorrow to the grave. Now therefore, when I come to your servant my father, and the lad is not with us, since his life is bound up in the lad's life, it will happen that when he sees that the lad is not with us, that he will die. So your servants will bring down the grey hair of your servant our father with sorrow to the grave. For your servant became surety for the lad to my father, saying, if I do not bring him back to you, then I shall bear the blame before my father forever. Now therefore, please let your servant remain instead of the lad as a slave to my Lord, and let the lad go up with his brothers. For how shall I go up to my father if the lad is not with us, lest perhaps I see the evil that will come upon my father? I really love this passage that I've just read out. That's verses 18 to 34 of Genesis chapter 44. This is an amazing passage. This is actually the first time in all of the Bible that we see somebody interceding on behalf of another person. We have Judah stepping up and saying to Joseph, who he doesn't know is Joseph, he just thinks it's this, really, really angry guy in charge. And he's saying, hey, I have put my life on the line for this young kid. Like, we as a family have gone through a lot to get here. We have a lot going on back at home with our dad, who is an old guy and he's close to death. And if we don't bring back our little brother, no matter what he's done, our dad is going to die. Can you please have some sympathy on our situation? And maybe instead of keeping Benjamin as your slave, I'll be your slave. Can we do that? And Judah, who has effectively taken Joseph's place in the family at this point, as the leader of the new generation, he has decided to fully put everything on the line. He's no longer just one of the brothers, he's the family leader. After Jacob dies, he is going to be the one who leads. And so it's putting not only his personal life, but his position in the family on the line, and saying, it doesn't matter about my life at all. Because if I go back, then my dad will die. And like, what good will that be? Like, I actually have enough care for my father at this point, that I don't want to see him grieved and to see him die on account of my little brother not being able to come home to him ever again. To the point that before we left, I said, hey Dad, I will go in his stead. So can you please just work with our family situation here for a bit, take me as your slave, and let him go free. And this is the most heartfelt thing that he could say. It is the most, I read somewhere, somebody said it was the manliest statement that anyone has ever made in the entire Bible, by putting his own life on the line for his younger brother. And I just, find that really amazing. Sorry, there are lots of birds in this area. And it really reminds me of Jesus. So Judah in this story is acting like a type of Christ. If you've never heard of types and symbols, it's actually something really fascinating to study. As you read through the Bible, asking the question of how can we see Jesus in this story, or how can we see God's character in this story? And in this story, we can see that Judah and what he is doing is just like what Jesus does for us. Jesus stands before the Father. Actually, he stood before the Father before the creation of the world. He knew, they as the Godhead knew that sin would come into the world. They had the foreknowledge of it. They didn't make it happen. They didn't want it to happen, but they knew that it would happen. And they decided that when this happens, instead of abandoning baby Benjamin, the rest of the world who is now stuck in sin, Jesus would come into this position like Judah is stepping into and say, hey, look, I want these, this younger brother, this Benjamin, this sinful fallen world of people, to be able to go home to the Father and to be in that right relationship and that loving relationship with the Father. So instead, I, Jesus, have decided to put my life on the line for them. And so he does this, and he is our intercessor. And we see that in the New Testament, especially in Hebrews, that Jesus is our high priest and he intercedes before the Father for us. He's willing to lay down his life for us, and he's done that for us. So I just really wanted to pull that part of the story out. That is the thing that really stood out to me in this story today. This intercession that Jesus has done for us, and this is what Judah was doing on behalf of his younger brother. But yeah, that's really the one thing that I wanted to share with you guys today, is seeing Jesus in this story as our intercessor, just like Judah was Benjamin's intercessor. So that's all I have to share with you guys today. Please let me know in the comments below what you got out of this and what you'd like to share with a friend today. Alright, I will talk to you guys again next Friday. See you!